We are just a few days away from the official release of Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm sure for many of you, like for me, this almost feels surreal, like it's not actually going to happen somehow, but it is. People are literally downloading the game right now as preloads are up. In this video, what I want to do is give you the rundown, all the information you're going to want to know and need to know before the official release date, and I tried to make this video as broadly appealing as possible. If you're someone who's been closely following the news, there'll probably be info in here you missed or just didn't really know the intricacies of. And if you haven't been following things super closely or just watching the gameplay trailers, this is a great one. It's going to give you a nice broad overview of all the aspects of the game you need to know about, and even the lore. If you want to skip around, there are timestamps down below and of course on the timeline. And if you want to get subscribed, I'm going to have a lots of content around this game, including trying to do a kill everything playthrough in Cyberpunk. That's one of the first things I want to give a go. With that said, let's first take a look at some of the release info, the things you need to know right now as it'll affect you in the next couple of days. So it seems like the preload is actually up for nearly all platforms. PS4 users are getting a 100 gigabyte download right now. For PC users on Steam and GOG, it's around 60 gigabytes in size, and it's roughly the same size on Xbox consoles also. And although you might think you're in the home free after having that massive 100 gigabyte download on PS4 in particular, there is still going to be a day one patch. Basically, what it looks like happened was over the past couple of days, a patch was distributed. So the game is typically 60 gigabytes plus the patch, it added another 40 or so, but this is not the day one patch, it's just a patch. And in fact, between last night and today, it seems like another smaller patch was also added. And basically, there's a ton of confusion here, but it seems like what these are parts of the day one patch. But the complete or final part of the day one patch has yet to be released. So you'll likely still have some download on day one. And it most certainly won't quite be as large as 40 gigabytes, but that is something to consider and be wary of. So on the release day, likely on December 9th, when many of us get to first play the game, there will be an additional download that patches out some additional bugs. Also, the release time for this game will vary by platform. The PC launch time is universal, just use this map based on your region, but if you're on a console, it's going to be at midnight local time, so when it changes from the 9th to the 10th. So particularly if you're in the US and using a console, you may be waiting until midnight while PC players are playing quite a bit earlier than you. Although, do note, if you are on an Xbox, you can change your area to New Zealand and play even a bit earlier. So it's PlayStation users that unfortunately will be the people really waiting. As you probably saw, many reviews for this game are out. I actually made a video summarizing a bunch of them if you want to check that one out. Although the embargo for gameplay footage is not yet out. And it seems like that embargo is lifting at 6 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. So at 6 a.m. Eastern time, I'm sure there'll be a flood of footage of people playing this game, including live streams of people playing this game if that's something you're interested in. But also worth noting with reviews, there has not been any console review codes distributed. So there hasn't been testing on consoles at least thus far. And although CD Projekt did share some gameplay on consoles in the past, we never saw gameplay on the base versions, that being the PS4 and Xbox One. So if you're playing the game on one of those, I would just be aware that it could have some potential problems. Not necessarily confirmed, but it's not looking good either. But if you are somebody on the last gen and going to upgrade to current or next gen at some point, an important reminder is cross-save is going to work somewhat. So let's say you're playing on a PS4 or even a PS4 Pro right now, but hoping to get a PS5 this holiday season, or just whenever they come back in stock around you, you will not only have a free upgrade to next gen, but also your save game will carry over. Now, it's not clear if you could just quickly switch between, like play a bit on PS4, jump to PS5, and then go back to PS4, but at the very least, you can bring over that cloud save onto the newer system, and this will apply to both Xbox and PlayStation. And also, since I don't want to get a copyright strike on this video, there are rumors that magically popped up over the past couple of days that there actually is a performance versus quality mode, seemingly on next gen specifically. It's not clear if this will apply to the Xbox One and PS4, but you can set the game to either run in performance or quality mode. This will likely make it so it has a 60 FPS target in performance mode and use a dynamic resolution, so it might look slightly worse, or a higher resolution and locking at 30 FPS in quality mode. A very important disclaimer though for some of you is that Cyberpunk 2077 definitely seems like it may cause some larger epileptic issues on release. As you've probably seen, there's a brain dance sequence in the game. It seems like this is one of the core features that will be used at several points throughout the main story, and one reviewer that does have issues around this does describe how this could inadvertently actually cause epileptic episodes by people playing the game, and she simply recommends to look away when the sequence does start. But then one of the big parts of Cyberpunk 2077 that I think is actually getting overlooked is the lore of the game, as there's quite a bit of lore you're going to want to know about this game, as it's actually not the first Cyberpunk game. And as we heard from some of the reviews, there's definitely benefits to having some background knowledge on the lore, things here or there that will pay off in a greater way if you know about the backstory. The lore for this world is going to be based off a tabletop RPG, which has several editions already released. The original being Cyberpunk back in the 80s, then we also got V3 and Cyberpunk 2020, and just this year, a little while ago, we actually got the release of Cyberpunk Cred, and more or less a recap of this lore without getting into spoilers for 2077. The Cyberpunk world split from the real world in the 1990s. Each of these past games, the tabletop RPGs, had their own setting and thus different time periods they filled out with additional lore. The game itself is of course taking place in Night City. This is located in California, in between LA and San Francisco. The world is very much so a dark and dystopian one. It has been ravished with wars, natural disaster, and overall crumbling economy. The federal government in the United States has lost much of its power. Several states declared themselves as free states. Now, the more powerful and almost ruling class in a way are corporations. War broke out between these corporations and even somewhat between the government at several points though, these marking several corporate wars, of which there were 4 in total. One of the most relevant corporate wars for Cyberpunk 2077 is the 4th corporate war, which was the most recent one. This took place in the 2020s. This led to leveling cities and caused a ton of destruction worldwide. During this, Johnny Silverhand was actually accused of detonating a nuclear device at Arasaka Tower, and it seems like based off the trailers, we will get to play through or relive this somewhat, like there'll be flashback scenes of Johnny Silverhand as he was actually alive. But on that note, Johnny Silverhand was never seen again after the night of that nuclear device going off, and if you weren't aware, in Cyberpunk 2077, it's his hologram. He wasn't actually alive during the game. So following the 4th corporate war and the destruction of it, the world spent a period of time rebuilding. There's a period of stagnation during this, but then things did start to progress again. There were some more wars and conflicts, but as we find the Cyberpunk universe right now in 2077, Night City stands as a free city, and corporations are still the real powerhouse, Arasaka being the largest of the corporations. But with that said, Night City still finds itself crime-ridden and infested with numerous gangs. Some of the major corporations to make note of, as they will be major players in the world, Arasaka is the most powerful of the bunch, and they deal predominantly in security, making weapons and vehicles, and actually holding quite a large military force of their own. Militech actually fought against Arasaka during the 4th corporate war. It has ties to the US government, including several ranking board members in Militech being high-ranking members of the US government, this being the new US government now though. Militech also responsible for creating a ton of weapons. King Tao is notable as it's a rising Chinese-based corporation that is creating smart weapons. And then Night Corp are another interesting one, as they're one of the corporations that actually cares for Night City. They value trying to protect the city and even improve it as they work to maintain the city overall. So that should give you a pretty good background and understanding of the world and where we find it. But outside of that, let's take a look at several gameplay aspects that we can discover in Night City and some of the core features you definitely want to know about. So right off the bat, one of the more controversial aspects of the game is it is going to be almost entirely first person, and there are barely any cutscenes even. Driving is one of the few things that do take place in third person, so the vast majority of the time you're seeing things from this perspective. CD Projekt said they made this choice to keep things immersive, to really ingrain you in this world, and some of the hands-on previews have described this actually being pretty effective. Our character is named V in the game. The game doesn't start off as a full-on open world. There reportedly is a 4 to 6 hour long prologue. Part of this will be your life path. There are 3 different life paths to choose right off the bat, and this will involve an hour or so of a unique gameplay start. But then from there, you'll always have your life path with you, with having unique dialogue choices, perhaps how you interact with people overall, or even access to certain side quests. And it seems like this does remain an aspect of the game. It's not like it just affects the start, but it does continue to be relevant throughout the game. Johnny Silverhand, of course, is a major character. He's actually in our head without spoiling too much, so he is literally a hologram stuck to you. You will see him consistently. You could have a positive or negative relationship with him though, so you are not even forced to like each other, and he'll pop up from time to time as you complete the story and even some of the side missions. One of the big comparisons made with Cyberpunk is against Grand Theft Auto, and you can see why. The marketing in particular has made these two games seem similar, but this is not always the case, as the game itself is described very much so as a true RPG first. So it won't always be people going guns blazing, but rather at many points you're going to have prolonged dialogue, character building, and of course just doing questing, which may not involve any combat. Combat in this game is described as starting off relatively slow, so if you get into it and think the combat is horrible, that's actually a common observation. But as you do spec out your character, get more skills, actually learn things, it does get significantly better, and combat is described as definitely ramping up as your character improves. The game doesn't really feature a stealing system either. You could just kind of freely steal stuff, and the NPCs haven't been described as reacting too heavily, but you can still anger cops and have them chase you. Actually, one of the higher wanted levels will lead to Max Tack chasing you. We saw these guys at several points in the trailers, and they look quite daunting. Pretty popular part of this game to get a lot of coverage is romance, and although it may seem like an integral part, it seems like it really isn't. If you don't want the intensity or to really pursue those romance options, you could just choose not to. You're not forced into certain scenes like that, and you could just avoid them altogether. And even further, there's going to be a nudity toggle. So if you want to play this in your living room, it seems like you definitely still will have an avenue to do so. The weapons in this game are going to come in several tiers. The core of these being power weapons, which are basically just conventional guns, tech weapons, which are railgun based weapons, smart weapons, which are the lock-on weapons you saw in some of those gameplay, and then finally melee weapons. You could apply mods to weapons, so you could actually add elemental damage types like shock or even fire damage, and also non-lethal is a thing, sometimes via the weapon type, sometimes via mods to weapons. One of the aspects of this game that really didn't get a ton of attention in marketing, but seems to be quite important, is the crafting system, as this game does feature a fully fledged crafting system. You craft weapons, cybernetics, clothes. More or less, it seems like the way this will work based on preview descriptions are that when you find a more rare item, that it'll break down into more rare crafting materials, and then you could use the rare crafting materials to craft more rare items. And all of this takes place in your inventory. There's nothing like workbenches or anything along those lines. As far as the tiers of items, it looks like there's right now going to be 5. You have common, uncommon, rare, epic, and then finally legendary, which seem to be somewhat unique items, so you could get them as quest rewards or actually just finding them in unusual places. Another important note is gear does have a level requirement to use, or at least some of it does. So at some points you may find an item that you can't equip or use yet because you're not the appropriate level. But even further, certain items will only have their full potential unlocked if you have the right attribute level. So there are 5 major attributes in this game. We'll talk about them in a moment, but it's worth noting this is not one of those games where you could just get everything and use it immediately. Some things do have barriers. Although when it comes to missions, it does seem like things are fully open. Although some missions will warn you because they are too high for your level, you can still do them. There's no artificial restrictions on how you could progress. One of the things I see get confused pretty often is street cred and what exactly this is. Street cred you're going to get by doing jobs for fixers and just doing miscellaneous tasks in Night City. This is separate from your overall level. Street cred is not your player level, it's a totally separate leveling system. And what it's going to do is impact 1, the stock that vendors actually have, but even further, what items you're actually able to purchase from vendors. So sometimes they may have a rare item or even a rare cybernetic, and you'll need a certain street cred level to actually be able to buy that. And speaking broadly, it seems like this game definitely gives you some choices around just going the typical route of leveling up and buying items as you need them, or alternatively finding the materials and crafting them yourself. But speaking of yourself, we also do have the skill and perk system in this game, as I feel like this is another one a lot of people have been getting confused on. And I think one of the reasons people may be getting confused is just how in-depth this system is. So the way this will work is, you first will have an overall character level, and of course you'll get this via typical means, questing, killing, etc. Right now it seems like your character level may be limited to level 50, although that's technically not confirmed, but if it is limited, that would mean you have a limit on how you could spec out your character. You can't just level up endlessly, but we'll probably have mods or something like that pretty quickly. Every so many levels, and the exact amount of levels isn't confirmed, you'll get an attribute point. And right off the bat, when you're making your character, you'll have a certain number of attribute points to spend. This allows you to increase one of the 5 main stats in the game. These are called attributes, the first of which is body. This determines your physical capabilities. So you can think of body as strength. It'll impact how much damage you take from attacks, your melee power, your carrying capacity overall. Intelligence, which is more straightforward. It'll give you additional options as far as hacking and certain abilities with cybernetics. Reflexes are focused around your handling of weapons. Technical ability, this will impact the effectiveness of the technology you have and some of your equipment and your ability to use those items. So think of this as the crafting and engineering section. And then finally, cool, which perhaps is the most vague of the bunch. It impacts your stealth abilities as well as critical hit. So to recap, those are the 5 major choices. Right off the bat, you can put 7 points into them, but then over time, as you level up, every so many levels, you'll get another attribute point you could spend. Attributes overall will just provide you with blanket benefits, but the other major consideration are skills. Under each of these attributes are skills, and each attribute has several skills under it. Basically, the way this works is skills are things you will naturally progress and improve as you actually use that item. So let's say you're looking at your handgun skill. As you use handguns in this game, get kills or headshots with it, your handgun skill will naturally start to progress and you'll get experience for it. But your handgun skill can only go up to the point of your overall attribute. So if your reflexes attribute is at 5, you can only get the handgun skill to 5. And then finally, under each of these skills are perks. And perks are the simplest of the bunch. It seems like every single time you level up, you'll get 1 perk point, and you can spend this either unlocking or leveling up a perk. Many, if not all of the perks do have numerous levels to them, but even further, as you get into a perk tree, as you can see on these grayed out perks, sometimes you have to unlock earlier perks to unlock some of the later perks. And this class system is pretty fluid in that you could place perk points pretty much wherever. So let's say you're really speccing into your gun skills, in that you're denoting a lot of attribute points to them, you're just using them a lot in game, but maybe you have a very low cool attribute, you could still put perk points into that and get benefits in other ways. The game does a really good job of just not locking you down, and reportedly there are over 250 perks to choose from, so there is an unfathomable amount of different customizations and combinations. So overall, that's large in part the skill, perk, and attribute system here. Hopefully it makes a bit of sense. I think it's a good dynamic between all things. You get a defined start off point from the beginning of the game that you can change and increase as you progress, but it kind of really starts off as substantial. Then from there, actually using certain items allows you to progress them and become better with them, but all along the way, you have perks to further refine your experience and define your character. As far as the broad overview of the story of this game as it stands right now, I'm not going to give any spoilers on the story overall, not even really a synopsis, because I know some people want to go in completely dark. Another thing to keep in mind is Cyberpunk has been described as almost unique compared to other RPGs in some way, in that once you actually get into the main game after you finish the prologue, a ton of side content will just be thrown at you. This side content is not only enjoyable and arguably one of the best parts of the game in its own right, at least according to some of these reviews, but even further will add on to the main story, give you several different choices along the way throughout the whole story, and also many ending choices. So if you're just beelining the main story and ignoring this side content, you're doing the game a huge disservice. I would definitely recommend, perhaps after a couple of main story quests, to take a break and do some of the side content also, as that might actually improve the next few quests you do and of course the overall ending. And although the main story is described as being pretty sizable, there also are a ton of side quests and jobs, just side activities you can do in general, so much so that some actually describe being overwhelmed by the choices, but there are things like doing jobs for Night City PD, actually collecting bounties for them, fighting many boss tier enemies known as cyber psychos you could find around Night City, and just in-depth side missions that explore some of the dark parts of Night City. Although a few things to note, you cannot join a gang or corporation, V works for herself. There are numerous endings to this game, these being based on your choices, and also a variety of other more minor side activities or mini games like fighting rings, street races, and of course the hacking minigame that apparently has several layers of depth. So that's all the info you need to know now before launch. But another important consideration that you've probably heard about and may want to know more about are post-launch details. One of the important ones being the next-gen patch, as I'm sure many of you guys are playing Cyberpunk on next-gen or now current-gen systems. We just know the patch is coming some point in 2021 and it will bring improvements to the game for next-gen. Right now it's working via backwards compatibility, although next-gen or current-gen versions of the game definitely seem to have improvements, whether it be crowd density or even just the FPS it runs at. This next-gen patch will also be totally free. Expansions and DLC were originally meant to be announced and revealed before the launch, but due to the delays are now coming after launch as news. The strategy right now is very much so that of what they used with The Witcher, free mini DLCs and then larger expansions that will cost money, featuring a season pass. So over the next couple of months, we'll certainly hear about those. They also did mention in a recent earnings call that in Q1 2021, they'll be detailing quite a bit about future plans for the company. So we'll likely have a more concrete roadmap as far as when some of this stuff could be coming. And of course, multiplayer is another thing coming to Cyberpunk, but this has really been described as almost being a standalone game. In the past, it was described as being free for all owners of Cyberpunk 2077, but it's been quite a while since that quote, so who knows? But at least it seems like the predominant strategy for monetization will be microtransactions, but these of course will be optional, and the multiplayer mode itself is again really described as being separate, and it's not coming for a long time after all of the expansions and not before 2022, so literally years away from being playable. New Game Plus is another thing they talked about adding. It doesn't seem like it's in the game thus far, but it does look like they may add it at some point. Mod support is another one that isn't coming at launch, but may come in the future. The Witcher 2 had official tools. This is running on the same engine as The Witcher 2, an updated version though, so perhaps we'll get more official or concrete mod support. There's obviously a huge audience for that, and I'm sure it'd be massive, so that would be a cool addition to this game. So at least in the near future, it doesn't look like we'll have official modding tools, but perhaps down the line they will come. And really, yeah, I think that's just about everything you're going to want to or need to know for Cyberpunk 2077 as we approach its release date. Hopefully this video either reminded you of stuff you've forgotten about or just taught you new things about the game and what it's going to be, and also what you should know while getting into it. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, but until next time, I hope to see you all later.